Hey, this is Jeremy from Sanhedrin, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 327 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I'm here with one third of Sanhedrin. I got Jeremy Sosville, the guitarist. So, how are you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good. At the time of recording this, it's release day, so it's like having a birthday party and a sigh of relief all rolled into one or something.
But yeah, it's great to be able to talk with you, man. So, kind of what I want to talk about is, of course, I want to talk about the new album, but I also like to talk about like your musical history. So, take me back to young Jeremy. So, growing up, what were like the first bands that got you into metal? What made you want to start playing guitar?
Uh, well, my dad plays guitar, so it was always around, and he's into like classic rock and stuff like that. So, it was just always something I thought seemed really cool. And then, speaking of dad, he put a Kiss record on, Kiss Alive 2, on the turntable when I was like 4 or 5 years old, gave me the jacket. And I remember it like it was yesterday because that was one of those moments of like, oh, this is something that people can do in life is dress up like maniacs and write songs and play loud, obnoxious music, and people will love them. Cool. And then, yeah, when I was like 12 or so, I got my own first guitar, learned how to play some power chords. And as soon as I could play power chords, I started a band, and we've been off to the races trying to get better ever since.
Nice. And of course, like a lot of people know you from Sanhedrin and of course like Black Anvil. What were your bands even like before that?
Well, my first band many, many years ago was a punk rock band that was kind of like an aggressive thrash influence band when I was a teenager. And again, that was just more like getting the most out of the least amount of skill. Um, and so I was in punk rock bands in high school into college. And then when I moved to New York City in about 2004, I was starting to develop as a lead guitar player and getting more interested in I mean, I was always interested in heavy metal as a fan. I just wasn't very good at playing it. And then as I got better at guitar and could, I joined kind of like a stoner rock, hard rock band there called Grande. And then, yeah, from there, I got the call to fill in for Black Anvil in about 2012. And I never left for about the next 12 years after that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah, but
wide
tell me
variety of
about that
stuff.
first band, that first album, Hail Death, which hard to believe last year was 10 years of that. So how do you feel about that album now over a decade later?
I look back on it fondly because at that time I was just sort of green to a lot of things. It's the first time I was in a band that was that heavy. It was the first time I'd ever played with musicians that were that seasoned and experienced, both as like touring acts as well as, making records. And it was a real education. We spent 2 weeks in the studio. We worked with a really great producer. Um, it was a really immersive experience. And when I look back at my contributions to that album now, I'm still proud of them. So that's always a good thing.
Nice. And then of course going to 2015 was when you formed Sanhedrin with you and Erica and Nathan. So how did you get to know the guys?
Uh, Nate and I were in a kind of I guess I didn't mention that band. We were in a band together for about a year and a half that was like kind of just like a rowdy hard rock heavy metal band. Um, but as long as it took us to get going, we fell apart pretty quickly. But during that time, Nate and I developed a very certain and strong chemistry as players and songwriters. I think his style of drumming and my style of guitar playing, we quickly realized we're very complementary to one another. Like he plays drums the way I always dreamt of a drummer to play drums in a band of mine. And if you asked him about my guitar playing, I imagine he would feel reciprocally similar. So we were jamming kind of on and off for the better part of a year, trying different people, getting different people in the room, different scenarios and lineup scenarios in the room. And one day he suggested we bring in his friend Erica, who he knew from working as a stagehand with her. He's like, yeah, she plays bass. She's a great singer and she's into heavy metal. And she came by. And then she and I, barely knowing each other at that time, clicked pretty well musically. We incorporated the vocal harmony thing that we're pretty known for very quickly. Wrote some songs. The song started coming together and forging its own identity as a band, and then our project turned into a band.
Yeah, and hard to believe this year does mark 10 years since the formation of Sanhedrin. Gotta think about it. Like, did you guys think that you'd be around for 10 years? Is this anything with the band that you would still like to achieve like a decade later?
We didn't think any of this was going to happen 10 years ago. I mean, even our first record, we self-released it, we self-financed it because we really just wanted to document the 8 songs that we had written together and make a as good a sounding record as we could at the time, and get it out to the world. What the world has given us back as a result of that has been a pleasant surprise every step of the way. To go from that to being on Metal Blade Records 10 years later, putting out a second record with them and having these European tour. We've gone to Europe so many times that I can't tell you off the top of my head how many this will make this next European tour. So, all that stuff is just a lot to be grateful for. And in terms of what's ahead, we're kind of just looking at the near to immediate, the immediate to intermediate future right now. We have some tour dates lined up between now and the end of June, and then in between, we're gonna see what else we can drum up for the rest of the year. But right now, we're just excited for what's on the table.
Yeah, but tell me about that first Sanhedrin album, A Funeral for the World. I thought that was like a great debut album. So, what was sort of like the mindset making like the debut full-length album?
Literally, it was just wanting to capture those songs as best we could at that time. We'd all made records with other bands and stuff, so being in the studio was nothing any of us were strangers to, which is probably why there is a cohesion on that record that maybe doesn't exist with a lot of bands' first albums. Um, yeah, we just there wasn't much of a vision per se, other than just capturing things, working. I had worked with Colin Marston, the engineer, that same year with Black Anvil. He had tracked an album called As Was, and I just really liked working with him. So that's how we wound up working with him there for this one. And
Yeah.
it just sort of came together naturally, but with no real goals, which is the coolest thing about it.
Yeah, because I know no 2017 was busy because you were doing that and as well as doing As Was by Black Anvil. So how did you manage to like balance those two bands at the same time around back
uh,
then?
a lot of luck, really. I had the benefit most of the time of our albums being released sort of on different parts of the calendar year. And so the activity of one band would take off, and then as it was slowing down, the other one would then take off and sort of layer upon layer. I don't, I mean, looking back on it now, I don't really know how I pulled it off. Uh, it was a lot of work. It was, pretty pretty tiresome, but I think I've just always been driven by, living in the present and enjoying it. And, as a creative person, these are the opportunities you live for. So I was just really trying to strike while the iron was hot, and I still am to this day.
Yeah. And then moving on to the second Sanhedrin album, the Poisoner. I like that album because usually with the debut full-length album, you have like your entire life to write, and there was a lot of hype with the first album. When it came to making the Poisoner, did you felt like any pressure to follow up A Funeral for the World?
Um, Not particularly. I think what was interesting is that was an album that the pressure, we did have a little bit of pressure in the sense that we had some deadlines we wanted to reach because by then we had signed to a label, Cruz del Sur Music.
How'd they find y'all?
Uh, Interestingly enough, well, there's a little bit of a story. So after the first record gets released by us independently, we started noting an influx of orders from Europe. And Um, we're like, what the hell's going on here? And it turns out we got featured in this German magazine called Deaf Forever. And then not long after that, we got approached by this fellow who writes for them, saying, "Hey, I featured you in our magazine. We want to get you on our festival in Hamburg called Hell Over Hammerburg." We're like, "Yes, please." And he's like, "By the way, I think you should get on a strong European heavy metal label." And we're like, "Well, we agree. Do you know anybody?" And so we wind up getting introduced to Enrico from Cruz del Sur, and we really quickly had the realization that his goals as a label and our goals as a band, merged very well. And he's great to work with. He's still a good friend of ours. And so, but with this festival lined up and we were lining up a tour around it, we had deadlines by which we had to get things turned in so that a record would be released at that same time. So that was the pressure we felt. But we were constantly writing at that time. So we already, by the time our first record came out, we were probably halfway through writing The Poisoner or what would become The Poisoner. We were rehearsing once a week. We were just we had a lot of creative momentum at that time. So when you have momentum behind you, it's hard to sit back and reflect on um, things like pressure creatively. Like, do we have to live up to the last record by making a better one? It was like, no, we're just gonna do what we do because none of this was expected anyway. So we sort of have this sense of playing with house money.
Yeah, cool. Cool. And then moving on to your previous album, Lights On, of course, first album on Metal Blade Records. So what was it like working with them?
Pretty cool. That record was a challenge because we started writing it in 2019. And then we had COVID in 2020. So that presented a lot of challenges in the sense that we wound up having to collaborate a lot remotely. Um, and then when that album came out, the industry as a whole, whether it be the record labels, the booking agencies, the live events industry, was really in a sense of flux and chaos. So that record probably could have gotten to more ears than it would have in a normal year. But it was a difficult record to get through. Like every one of us had some personal turmoil unrelated to the band happening during that, and the band and the creation of that record was sort of a place of refuge for the three of us at different times.
Yeah. Yeah. And did that at all like influence the album in a way, or did you try to like keep it like separate from that?
It certainly did. I mean, the big influence is it was the first record we put together where we weren't all together when it was being created. So it was a lot of, "Hey guys, I have some riffs. I'll send them to you." Then we talk on the phone. "Oh, I'm hearing this part as a verse or a chorus." And then we would get together from time to time. And then when we did, we had all this stuff as a reference point so we could work efficiently when we did get together. But it wasn't the same sort of setting as the first two records where we're just at rehearsal once a week in Brooklyn. And it kind of worked in our favor because I have since left New York City and, live several hundred miles away from them now. So this newest record was constructed in a similar way, but with a more efficient workflow.
All right. All right. And I know you were doing also your last album with Black Black Anvil at the time. So what
Yeah.
was that like? How hard was it to like leave Black Anvil because you just really wanted to focus more on Sanhedrin?
Not really. It was sort of it was a mutual parting of ways. Um, we had kind of just drifted apart creatively, I think. What I want to do as a guitar player and as a songwriter, when I'm picking up the instrument, just wasn't relating to what they were doing very much anymore. And I don't, obviously, if they probably noticed the sense of me just not thriving in the band creatively. And so we just decided that we would part ways. It was amicable, and it was less about Sanhedrin and more just about respecting Black Anvil and not trying to force something to be that should not be.
Right. And so, of course, now we have the new Sanhedrin album, which came out today, Heat Lightning under Metal Blade Records. And I was like listening to it in preparation for it. It is absolutely kick ass. So how was the whole writing and recording process for it?
Uh, yeah, it was done mostly similar to the last record because I live in upstate New York now, pretty far from those two who are still in Brooklyn. A lot of it was just I'd send some riff ideas and some song ideas down to them, or we'd have shows that we'd be getting together for tour dates, and while we're together, we spend a lot more time working on ideas in a condensed form, like in a more intense form, uh, versus casually once a week. The first couple songs we wrote were quite different from one another. Heat Lightning and High Threshold for Pain were the first two song ideas to be born for this record. And those two songs are quite different in vibe from one another. And so it was like, well, now the mission is we got to write a group of songs that, you know, stand on their own, obviously, but could be sequenced in a way where it makes sense that these two songs work on the record together, different as they are. And so the rest of the songs we felt, or we do feel, sort of bridge that gap. So it's not that unusual. From the time you hear Heat Lightning to the time you get to High Threshold for Pain, it's not such a reach. If we had released that as a two-song 7-inch, it'd be like, wow, this band is two different things at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And then did you also musically wanted to continue in the same vein as Lights On, or did you wanted to try something new or different that Sanhedrin hasn't done before?
Well, we're always sort of exploring different aspects of our influence range beyond the obvious hard rock and heavy metal influence that we have. I think the big difference we wanted to have consciously was we wanted this record to sound a little different than the last three. So hence why we used different engineers in a different studio setting, and but that all came together pretty organically as well. We just wanted the production to still sound classic like our first three records did, but have a bit more clarity and muscle and crispness and maybe ferocity to it. So like the drums have always sounded big on our records. On this record, they sound even bigger. The guitars have always been aggressive. In this record, they're more in your face. And Erica's singing on this record, in terms of her tracking at the studio, was super polished, even more so than records past. So it's just all added up to this moment in time for this band.
Yeah. And what would you say like the overall like theme and message is for Heat Lightning?
Well, I know Erica has had a lot of thoughts about a particular type of ruling class elite ruling over people and using religion as their method to do so, or at least the illusion of using religion as a way to control people. So Christo-fascism, for lack of a better term, which is a very uniquely American phenomenon. But because we have a wider fan base, we tried to universalize some of the lyrics that were inspired by that to be relating to more than just somebody who's experiencing that one specific thing. And then another theme that recurs is just humankind's relationship to nature and how we're quite separate from it at this moment in time, and how that may be at our own peril.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love one thing I love about the album is like every song feels different. Like take like the first song Blind Wolf, which just really just was very rock again, and then going into like Heat, the title track, which is just kind of almost does have that kind of 70s 80s feel, and even song like
Yeah.
Above the Laws has that kind of like punky rock vibe. So it's fair to say, safe to say like you and Erica and Nathan all have bring like their your own kind of like style into Sanhedrin.
Yeah, and we want every song on the record to stand as its own unique experience. And then, the way we sequence the songs in the album is such that hopefully you don't hear a song and then the next song you're like, oh, that sounds just like the song I just heard. We don't want that. We want every song to make you curious to be like, oh, what's next?
Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody were to like listen to this album for the first time, should they listen to like Blind Wolf and then end with When Will the Become the Chain, or you can like be approached from like different angles?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we did Blind Wolf as the first single is because it's a great introduction to the band. If you've never heard us before, it kind of gives you a quick, easy, satisfying um, dose of what we're about, but hopefully makes you curious. And then from there, I think you could listen to any song on the album. And, the thing is, every song is a unique song and has its own sort of genre twisting to it. But at the end of the day, it's us three playing it with our intention being the through line between all the songs. So, yeah, I don't know if I could recommend a specific song. I would just say listen to the whole thing and enjoy it. Hopefully.
Totally. And then t talking about like the music, because I feel like you come up with some really great riffs. Like there's some moments where that sounds like heavy metal, then almost kind of like slow down a bit, and also like rock vibe. When sort of like listening to it, how do you like come up with the riffs, and how what kind of like inspires you to for the song to be like, okay, we need to do this kind of style or this that kind of style?
Yeah, we don't we don't consciously say we need a punk rock song, let's write one. It's more like usually riffs are born when I'm in my studio or on the couch just messing around on the guitar and something just happens. And I'll be like, "Oh, that's cool. Let me pursue that." And then I might pursue it to build more parts from it or take that one part and expand upon it or what have you. And again, we're doing what comes natural to us. So it may sound like a punk rock song or have that thrash influence or maybe some power pop influence in there at times. And it's just because those are just all things in our subconscious that come out when we're creating and twisting those influences into something that's our own.
All right. And then talking about like your live show, because I have not seen Sanhedrin live, and I'm hoping y'all make it down to Atlanta soon. So talking about playing live, is there any kind of like differences to like playing live versus like recording, or they're kind of like almost like separate from one another?
Well, whenever we do record, we try to make it a point to make sure that it doesn't deviate too far from what we would sound like live when playing those same songs. So there are things the studio offers you that we don't do, like multiple layers of vocals or guitar harmonies and stuff like that, because live we wouldn't be able to pull that stuff off. So I think the live experience is more just watch us play these songs with sincere passion and getting up there and sweating and hopefully making you understand in that setting what we're about.
Awesome. And then the final question I want to talk to you is coming from New York, which is definitely one of the biggest like states in the US, but so many different like band styles. Like you guys sound like different from like Anthrax, and Anthrax doesn't sound like Kiss, or Kiss doesn't sound like Biohazard, and Biohazard doesn't sound like Dream Theater. So I feel like New York has like a diverse taste, diverse kind of like styles of rock and metal. So was it for you, Sanhedrin, to sort of like be comfortable being part of that whole like New York kind of like rock and metal scene, or was it the goal to like get outside of New York and play in front of different countries and crowds and audiences and stuff?
Well, we definitely are a New York band. I think all those bands have something in common, which is there's a groove. The New York groove would be a cliche term to use, but most New York bands have like a swagger to their rhythm. And I think we carry that along with us as well. And I think the diversity of those bands just comes from the fact that there's people from all over the world that wind up here. And there's just a big difference in, if you grew up in this neighborhood, you're hearing these kinds of songs coming out of people's cars as they drive by versus if you're in the Puerto Rican neighborhood, you're hearing this. If you're in the Polish neighborhood, you're hearing that. And, you're hearing all these different sounds and they kind of converge in a unique way to the group that is assembling that to make their own music.
All right. And sort of kind of in the end to sort of wrap things up, what's next for Sanhedrin? New album is out now today. It's just anything with this new album cycle that you like to plug in also in terms of tours and stuff, if you're allowed to announce.
Yeah, we have a European tour in May and June with Savage Master, and then
Yes, the
before that, we're
homies.
playing. Yeah, we're playing Hell's Heroes March 20th. We're playing the 2 Minutes to Tulsa After Party March 30th. And then April 26th, we'll be in Pittsburgh playing our friends Lady Beast's record release show. And then after that, we're just going to see what comes to us as a result of what's happening today, the record release.
Awesome. So thank you, Jeremy, for taking this time for this conversation. It's just any
Got it.
final words you want to say to the viewers that are watching this to close this out?
Just thanks to everybody who supported us throughout the years. And if you're just hearing of us, check us out, give us a chance, and hopefully we'll see you out there.
Awesome. So everybody, Jeremy Sosville from Sanhedrin. We'll see you next